Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Diego. I am with the support team at Designlab. And today it's Design Skills Workshop with Kieran. So I'm going to introduce him. Thank you again for joining us, Kieran.
Okay.
So we're just going to get started, right? And we'll leave, for those of you who have joined us before, we'll let Kieran talk. Please add all of your questions to the questions tab, and we'll get to all of those questions at the end. Once again, really appreciate you joining us. For those of you that are just coming through, my name is Diego. I am with the support team. I'm with the support team at Designlab, and with me is Kieran, who's going to be leading our webinar today. Please add all of your questions to the question tab, and I promise you that we will get to all of them towards the end. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple, and I'll let him get started.
Perfect. Thanks, Diego, and thanks everybody for coming on board. So today we're as part of the continuation of of the very basics of Figma. We're going to be talking about the text and the type tool today. So let's just jump right in because there's a lot to cover as always. And yeah, as Diego said, put in your questions in the questions tab, and we'll get to them at the end. Perfect. So let me start by sharing my screen. It's always a good place to start. And we'll jump right into Figma. Okay, so the very first thing to know about the type tool is how to actually access it and how to use it. So the very first thing that we can do is we can either use the shortcut, which a lot of people might be familiar with if they've used any other design tool. And that's just simply using the T command, like the T shortcut. And what that'll do is that'll focus on the text tool, and that will allow you to then start typing or to click and drag and start typing. You can also see that it's highlighted up here. So if you ever forget that all-important T shortcut, you can actually just click it up the top here. But it's always good to learn your shortcuts. While I'm talking about shortcuts, just a note, I get this question asked a lot of me, is what is the shortcut for X? And yeah, Figma's actually done a pretty good job at documenting all of their shortcuts. So the best place to go there is if you go to the little hamburger icon, and this is true for the desktop or the web version. So if you go to this little hamburger here, and if you go into help and account, inside of that there's keyboard shortcuts, and you can also click Control Shift and then the question mark if you want a shortcut to the shortcuts. It's kind of meta there, but what that does is that brings up oh, sorry, it does that when you click on it. It brings up a little toolbar of all the different tools that you can use. So you've got the essential, you've got your tools, you've got your view, your zoom, text, and so on. So as you can sort of see, today we're going through text, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that you may be familiar with even tools like Word and Excel and stuff like that. So things like Command B, or for the Windows users out there, Control B, and so on. But there's also things like creating a link, like left aligning your text, right aligning your text, and changing the font size, weight, letter spacing, and line height there as well. So you can use all of those shortcuts to do that. So there's heaps and heaps of stuff in there. I won't bore you with it all, and some people will go and learn these. Some people will just leave it alone. But yeah, if you're wanting to just do that a little bit extra, the keyboard shortcuts are there for you. All right. And then again, to hide that, you can hit the Control Shift question mark, or again, go to the help and get rid of it there. Okay, so now that we have the text tool invoked, so we have this little highlight up here. As I mentioned, there's a few different ways that we can, let's just create a little thing here, a little artboard here. If we have the text tool invoked, there's two ways that we can start to create a piece of text. It seems simple, but there is a major difference between the two. So simply clicking and typing, again, seems really, really rudimentary. But what this does is this by default sets the width to auto width, meaning that as you start to type, the text frame, so the little blue frame around the text, will actually grow to the size and keep going with whatever text you put inside of it. So it'll keep it on one single line, and as the name suggests, automatically adjust the width based on that. The other way to do it, and this is the way that I don't recommend doing it, is clicking and dragging to create a text box. The reason why I don't recommend doing this is what it does by default is it creates a fixed size element. And what that means is that if I was to just copy and paste this over and over again, what it'll do is it'll eventually break outside of that box, right? Meaning that it won't actually ever, if you go to give this to a developer, what they'll do is they'll go, okay, cool, I want to measure how far away is this text box from everything else around a new document. And the very first thing they'll do is they'll hold down the Option key to then test out like what the sizing is, and they'll go, okay, cool, 80 pixels. All right, I'll develop that up for you in code. And to you and I, obviously it's not 80 pixels, but to the developer it is, right? And that's what we've got to be careful of. So it's not just me being pedantic. There is actually a reason at the end of the day as to why you wouldn't want to do that. So how do you transform something that is a fixed size into something that is auto width? And some of you may be wondering what the middle one is, and I'll get to that in just a second. So let's go from fixed size back to auto width. So easily we can like just simply select auto width here. But if you don't want to go all the way there, because I know it's a really long slog from halfway across the screen to the other side, we can also double click on the text frame here. And what that'll do is that, as you can sort of see, as long as there's no hard return, so you haven't hit like enter or return on your keyboard, it will transform it into one single line. And if we zoom out, you can see that it goes for quite a while there. So then you might be wondering, okay, well, how do we get it so that it doesn't do that? How do we get it so that it wraps onto multiple lines? Because obviously I don't want my text to be 3,474 pixels long. So let's do that. So as we can sort of see here, we actually still have the ability to adjust the text frame. So if we adjust it from the bottom, what you'll notice is that it goes to a fixed size. And what that means is that because we're defining the size of it beyond what it would normally be doing, right? It's beyond what the text is normally supposed to be doing. So by default, it will always go to a fixed size. However, if you just adjust the width, like so, if I get all the way over there, if I just adjust the width of it, you'll notice that it automatically like goes on to the next line because we're adjusting the width of it. It's a really subtle and boring difference, but it's actually really, really important. So what this means is that what we've created is an auto height element. So what that does is, as the name suggests, based on the width we've set, it will automatically adjust the height based on how much text is in there. So in this case, I can then give this to the developer and they know exactly how high or wide this should be away from everything else based on that, right? So what this allows us to do is as we add more stuff on, you can see that the blue text frame around it is then getting adjusted. Right? And that really helps everybody understand what is actually going on with your document as we do it. So those are the three differences there. And like I said, they're quite nuanced and they're a little bit boring, but it actually makes a major difference in your design. There's countless times where I see this happen, and then the next line is like trying to associate it to the bottom of that, and it's just so this one is that then becomes like a regular font, and that one's a body font, and then they sort of say like, oh, okay, it's -1 pixels away from it. And that, as you can sort of see, that just isn't true. There's a lot more than -1 pixels associated to the bottom of this. So yeah, it's very, very important to figure that sort of stuff out. Okay, so that's your text and your text frames. But let's actually get into some of these properties here. And again, some of these might be a little bit straightforward, like, oh, of course, like that's how it works. But we do want to come at this as an absolute beginner and sort of like go through each and every one of these. So the first thing here is our font family, right? So we have our font family. By default, Figma has a whole bunch of Google fonts installed. And it's another big question that I keep getting asked is like, how do I install local fonts and all that kind of stuff? In this case, Google is your friend. Figma has a whole bunch of tutorials on how to do just that. If you're using the desktop app, you shouldn't need to use the font helper. There's a thing called a font helper that actually looks at your fonts and reports to Figma, hey, these are the fonts that they have installed, and locates the font folder for them, and does all that for them. If you're using the web version. If you're using the desktop version, it should just work out of the box, but sometimes it doesn't, and you can use that. When you install a new font, every single time, you do have to restart Figma, and not just close the tab, actually like close the whole of the Figma down, and restart it, because what it needs to do is it needs to refresh that font list and find those new fonts that you've just installed. That's true of a lot of different like design tools, including some of Adobe's tools as well. So it's not just a Figma problem; it's a design tool problem, and as well as some of the platforms require you to only look at the font list once per like use. So one use is considered however long the app is open for. So if you close down the app and then open the app again, it then refreshes. It goes and looks at that list again. So yeah, that's why that is a problem for a lot of people. And yeah, that's where I would sort of start there. But as you can sort of see, I am using the desktop app. So I do have access to all of my fonts, a lot of Google's fonts in there as well. And the font that I'm going to be using today is Inter. The reason why I'm using Inter is it's actually designed by one of the people on the Figma design team, but that's not why I'm using it. The main reason why I'm using it is because it's a really great geometric sans serif, meaning that it's mostly made of geometric shapes, and it's a sans serif, meaning that it doesn't have all the little like serif feet and all that kind of stuff, little ticks off the side, and yeah, and it also has a lot of open type features. So open type is like an extended format beyond what you might get from like true type fonts. So when you see a font, it's usually like a .ttf file or a .otf file. So the .ttf is true type font, and then OTF, open type font. So open type fonts usually have a few more features in it. So things like ligatures. So when you have like two letters or something like that, or symbols, and when they join together, they make an ultra symbol, and go from there. And I'll show you a few of those in just a minute. But Inter is a good way to sort of like test out some of these features if you're curious about open type, and to see if your font is a good font, in terms of if it's up to date with all the coolest stuff. And OpenType is a format that allows all that cool stuff, like ligatures and other options. So yeah, let's dive into so that's font families. So that's just simply like coming in and choosing your font. And of course, based on the font that you choose, you will then only have access to whatever the font allows you to have access to. So if you have light, thin, extra light, regular, medium, semi-bold, bold, extra bold, and black, and then you also have all the italic versions of that, that is obviously dependent on the font that you choose. So if I chose Comic Sans, for example, you've only got regular and bold, right? You don't have all of those. So you only have like what the font allows you to have. Okay, so that's font and font weight. So font family and font weight. Then we've got size. So size is pretty straightforward. Again, if you've ever used like Word or Excel, you're very familiar with this. Just simply make this bigger or smaller depending on what you need. Line height, however, is a little bit different. So based on your font size, you have this other thing that's called line height. So when you, let's actually grab a piece of text that is not boring, and let's just get some lorem ipsum generator just for now. And that one there. And let's just grab the description of what lorem ipsum is. Let's not even worry about generating that there. And let's paste that in. Okay, so this is perfect because this has not only our piece of text here, but it also has a paragraph return. So we'll get into that in just a second. And then we can sort of like go through all of these in why we would use each of these in different ways. But right now it is set to auto height because, but there is a little bit of extra padding at the bottom there because there's a few extra returns. I'm just going to delete those. All right, so we've got our text here. So as we change our line height, what you'll notice is, or you may or may not have noticed, is that based on the line height, your actual font, your actual height of the overall text element in this case is a multiple of that line height. So in this case, we have 320. So 320 divided by 20, so 16. So there's 16 lines of text in this throughout. So what this allows us to sort of like quickly do is make sure that like we are making sure that the legibility of each line is there. So as we increase this, what you'll notice again is that the height of it changes as well, but we're increasing the legibility of each line. We don't want it too far apart because then we can't tell if this line belongs with the previous line. We don't want it too squashed. We don't want it too squashed like this because then it becomes hard to read. So we want somewhere in the middle. And yeah, and as you can sort of see, we can go too far and it starts to look like you're trying to cheat at a high school test there by saying like how many pages you've written. So yeah, what we're trying to do here is like make a nice balance between the two. So we want the Goldilocks sort of method here. So not too hot, not too cold, and we're trying to find that. So what I often get asked this question as well. It's like, what is the correct like line height for this? Well, it's a little bit hard. It's not exact an exact science, but what we can sort of see from here is if you use Figma's auto feature, it does it based on a few different variables, but it rounds it up to like whatever it deems to be the right font size for this. So in this case, if we used Comic Sans and did the same sort of thing, you can see that based on the font metrics itself, it will actually choose what the line height should be. And that's not anything that like I usually go by, but it's something to be aware of, that some fonts, the designer of the font might have actually chosen the perfect like line height based on that, because Figma takes one of the font metrics in there and uses that as its base throughout. So for something like this, the scale that I usually do is the line height is really based off of the font size, right? It's a factor of the font size. So here's a little like way to remember it. Let's go into our tutorials and go into line height. So inside of this, and we've got a few different examples here. So depending on your font scale, so however many font sizes you have throughout your whole entire document, what you'll find is that you may start off with like 8 and you might end up with 96. And of course, like it depends on the font scale and the font size and font metrics and blah, 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 as to what size you'll be using. But this is a good thing to sort of like start off with and figure out like what works for you. But generally, the rule of thumb is anywhere between 1.2 and 1.5 for your line height. And what you'll notice is that as we go from 8 pixels all the way up to 96 pixels, the factor actually goes down. So the rule of thumb here is the bigger the font size, the smaller the factor for the line height. So at this point, you do 96 times 1.2. At 8 pixels, you do like 8 pixels times 1.5. And there you go. The smaller the font size, the bigger the factor for the line height. What this bell curve is sort of like showing you here is that most of the fonts that you'll be using like pretty regularly in your designs are between the sizes of like 12 and 20. This is mainly because your paragraph setting will be set to that. Your buttons, your text fields, your checkboxes, your radios, so on and so forth, will all be usually within that range of 12 to 20. So you sort of like have a bit of a bell curve around that. And what I find is that between that bell curve is quite a big leap between 1.5 to 1.3. And then it's a very slow like change between 1.3 and 1.2 for the rest of that bell curve. So yeah, most of your fonts beyond the 20 are going to be all headings. So they tend to all be within that 1.3 to 1.2 range. And like I said, it isn't an exact science. It's really dependent on quite a few different factors. So let's have a look at a few different examples here. So for example, we have this intent of success criterion is to provide enough contrast, right? And then we've got this piece of text here as well. So this piece of text is 96, right? So if we were to use 96 times 1.5, it'd be 144. And so if we put in that 144 here, it looks like, if we zoom in at 100%, it kind of looks like it's on, it's not as tight. It looks a little bit weird. It looks like there's some weird spacing going on, right? It doesn't look like this line belongs to the previous line, or this line belongs to the next line, or whatever. It looks like they're 3 separate lines. But if we change it back to the original, which was closer to 1.2, so if we go 96 times 1.2, it's 115. I typically like to round mine up. So I would go to 116 in this case. So let's do that. So 116. And you can sort of see that it's a lot nicer to look at, right? And as I mentioned, the inverse is true. So if I was to set this to like 14, right? So something super, super small. And then set this to 14 times 1.5 is equal to 21. So if I set that to 21, like that's quite nice. But if I set it to 1.2, 14 times 1.2 is 16. So again, rounding it up. So if that was 17, that would be just a little bit too tight there. So it's dependent on the font metrics itself. It's dependent on the font weight sometimes. So sometimes the font weight actually makes it look like it's way too close, and you have to fix that up. So that's definitely something to look out for. But it's highly dependent. So that's why I say it's a rule of thumb. It's a guideline. It's not an exact science. So take that with a grain of salt. All right, I think we've talked about line height just about enough, but it is there. It's a good tool to be aware of and to know, and it really sort of like makes and breaks your design. You'll notice like that if you just change, if you really pay attention to the line height, if you're using a lot of like chunks of text throughout your document, it will just make your document just that much better overall. Okay, and then we also have letter spacing. So let me just undo this and get it back to the 18 and 28 for a second. So what we also have here is letter spacing. And what this allows us to do is, as the name suggests, put spaces between each letter or each symbol. So we can do that based on a percentage, right? Oh, and the other thing is that we can also do the line height based off a percentage. I forgot to mention. So we can just simply say 150%, right? And then that will automatically calculate that 1.5 factor if we want. So a lot of people like to do that and use that. The only problem with that is that it does produce decimals. If you're pedantic like me about that kind of stuff, yeah, it's not the greatest. But you can with your developer figure out the best way and the approach for that. So yeah, so let's just leave it as a whole number. So I'll set it back to 28 and set the actual number there. And then we've also got this letter spacing here. So this letter spacing you can do based off a percentage or based off a pixel value. So if we set it to like 15%, 16%, so on and so forth, as you can sort of see, as I move this up, it becomes more and more spaced, and it starts to look like a reading test at an optometrist. So we can also set this to 1 pixel as well, right? And then, of course, you can then up that based on that, and then set it based on whatever you want to do. So we have absolute values, and then we have percentage values based on the font size. So yeah, so those are the 2 ways of doing it. Then lucky last, we have our paragraph spacing. So as the name suggests, it's the space between paragraphs. So what does that mean? Well, right now we don't have any paragraphs. So let's do a hard return. So as you can sort of see, this is all set to auto width, meaning that there's no like as I switch it from auto width back to auto height and then readjust this back to 650. There are no hard returns on this right now. So there are no, there's nothing that is dictating it to be a paragraph. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that and add a paragraph in here. So I'm going to delete that space there and then hit return to do a hard return and move on to the next line. So to do that, let's now adjust the paragraph spacing. So as we can sort of see, as we move that between there, this is still the same text block, but what it's doing is it's actually defining the paragraph style inside of there. So this is like super helpful if you're wanting to like quickly create a whole bunch of like bits and pieces of text without necessarily having to have, for every single paragraph, have a new text element on your page, right? Because that can be tiresome after a while. So obviously it also works for multiple paragraphs. So if I copied and pasted this onto the end of that and then hit return, it will then put in that 32 spacing. And of course, if I adjust that, I can then change that to whatever I want. So the default is always set to 0, but you can come in here and then you can adjust it. So what a lot of people do is they either like to base it off the line height and do it through there, or they like to base it off of maybe their spacing system. So their spacing system is sort of like what we was just talking about, like last week with your color system, and this week we'll go into our type system, our font scale system. You might want to use it based on the spacing, or you might want to use it based on the type. It's up to you. And again, consult your developer and talk through with them like what the pros and cons are for both. So some people do it like as a factor of the line height. So if it's set to 28, they might do 28. If it's set to 28, sometimes it's either 1, 1.5, or 2 times the line height. So so if we set this to 28, we can sort of see that it looks like there's like one single line in between there. Obviously, if we set it to 28 times 1.5, it's 42. So we can do that and set it to 42. By the way, I don't know why I keep pressing Command Space to do the calculations, because Figma actually does the calculations inside of the text fields here. So I can actually, instead of like hitting Command Space to do the little spotlight feature there, I can actually say 28 times 1.5 and then hit enter, and it'll go to 42. So that does like really basic math. It doesn't do like square root and stuff like that. But you can do like 24 plus 59 or something like that, right? If you're just like, I need this really specific number, and then hit enter, and then it will do it, right? It also works for dividing. So if you do like 96 divided by 3, it'll put that in there as well. So yeah, just a little tip for you. So for the time being, I'll just leave that at 0 because I'll manually hit enter for those. But yeah, and then we also have our text align left, text align center, and text align right. So all of these are like pretty basic. As we can sort of see, this is left to right, and then we are going to put it into center, and we've got our centered text, and then we have our right to left alignment there as well. So there are plugins as well to do right to left languages. If you're interested in doing that, if you're doing something like Arabic or something like that, there are like plugins for that, and we can go through those in a minute. All right, so the other like little options here are the alignment tools. So we have these are considered align horizontally, right? So these are all sort of is it left align, is it center, is it right align? These are all vertical, so these are like top, middle, and bottom. So if we were to stretch this, and then we can then start to see like, okay, well, does this fit inside of that, or does this fit inside of that at the bottom there, and so on. I typically don't touch this because I don't like to set up my text boxes like this. It's a little, like I said, it's setting it to fixed size, which again is problematic for a lot of different reasons. And it just is a little bit weird. I'd rather use a tool like Auto Layout, which will go into later detail in another episode. But I'd rather use something like Auto Layout to help me out with the layout of my text in this kind of way. So yeah, so typically I leave it at a line top and just leave it like that. And then I'll also just set it back to the default here. All right. So you may be wondering what this little 3-dot menu here is. And that is advanced like parts of the text properties. So this advanced text type details has a few of the things that we were just talking about, but it also has a few extra bits and pieces. So again, this is all based on well, not all of it, but some of it is based on the OpenType format, and the fact that this font here has extra features on top of it. So if your font doesn't have that, don't freak out. It's not that you've done anything wrong. It may be that the designer for the font just hasn't included that, or you may be using a TTF rather than an OTF file format. So you can always check that. Usually if you buy from the bigger sites like myfonts.com, Font Squirrel, and like FontSpring and stuff like that, they will usually offer like multiple versions of it. And they'll give you the OTF, the TTF, and depending on your license that you've bought, you may get a WOF and a WOF2 and EOF, an EOF and SVG and all kinds of different ones there. So yeah, the very least you should get is TTF and OTF, and then depending on your license, there's other versions of it as well. All right, so inside of this type details, like I mentioned, we have a few extra things on top. So we have the alignment that we were just talking about, but we also have justification. And this is something that I see in a lot of like junior designers work, is justification of text. Unless you're making a magazine layout or a newspaper layout for that matter, I simply wouldn't use this. It's harder to pass, and it's really meant for like skinnier columns of text, to be able to like have a lot of like text in a small amount of area, and be able to fit it in a column way, kind of like this, right? And we're not really going to be doing that in web. With web, we have the ability to be responsive with all of our frames. So we don't really want to force the user to do something like this if we don't have to. So typically, I don't use justification at all in my designs. So yeah, just food for thought there. Then we've got our decoration. So as again, familiarity with this should be quite high. You have underline and you also have strike through. So as the name suggests, they give you an underline or a strike through there. You can also do a paragraph indent. So what this does is it takes the new line of every new paragraph and indents it. So again, if you're doing something where you want to stylistically like have an indent on that, as you can sort of see at the end of every hard return there, it's then pushed in 60 pixels from there. So you can do that here as well. Then we have let me zoom in just a little bit, so it's not too far away. And I'm going to just set this back to 0 just because it's bugging me a little bit there. All right. And let me just reset this back to 0 as well. And let me get rid of the left and right justification there. Okay, then we also have our letter case. So again, this might be, a lot of people might be familiar with this already, but again, it's good to go over it. So we have uppercase. So as the name suggests, we turn everything uppercase. We have lowercase, which, as the name suggests, turns everything to lowercase, and title case. I particularly don't like this title case because it's not doing true to form title case. It's actually just taking every first letter of every word and making that a full stop. A capitalization of that letter. That's not true how you would do up title case. So there is actually a plugin that does a better job, and I'll quickly show you what that is. So if you go to the plugins, you can go to manage your plugins and install one that is called proper title case. So again, we're not hiding anything there. It's a pretty straightforward name. It says what it is on the tin. So proper title case. And what you'll notice is that I first need to undo the bad title case by just resetting it so as typed. And what you'll notice here is that if I then take this and redo that, because it's just wiped away all of that stuff, you'll notice some of the words are no longer capitalized. So things like of and a and as and on and stuff like that, and things like et al. And that kind of stuff, like versus with and without the period, so on and so forth. Although of those words are not being used as a title case. So it's using it based off of the Chicago APA style, I think is based on that. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But yeah, it's a much better title case used there. All right, so let me set it back to this. And so then we also have case sensitive letter forms. So these are all like extra bits and pieces that we can sort of like look at. So this here is going to be specific to the font there, but yeah, it's not used for every single one. Same with the capital spacing. So sometimes you want a little bit more spacing on either side of your capitals, and especially for things that have all the accents, and you want to have just that little bit of extra spacing. That's also there. You have things like, again, depending on the open type font, the proportional, like uppercase and lining, or like if you have like a little bit of extra spacing in between. So so the proportional is like what you would expect. but then you might have monospace spacing. So this font supports monospace spacing for numbers. So why is that important? Well, if you're making like a banking app, right? So if I say $1,000, right? And then let's put a comma, and then let's do a dot, and then OO, and then let's have that there. So the pretty obvious thing what you would do is if you are adding numbers up, you would do a text align right for this. So let's do that. And then if I wanted to add $100 to that, we can then sort of see that you would then start to want to line those things up, right? But right now we are using pretty much the same numbers throughout. So if I do 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 7, so on and so forth, what you'll notice is that 1 typically is actually a lot smaller than 8 width-wise. So if I took the same exact number underneath and then grab that and then put this, change this to that monospaced, what you can then sort of see is that each letter here is the exact same width all the way through. So this really helps when you're trying to line numbers up and like add multiple numbers to other like numbers, and then also see a sum of those kinds of things. Whereas if I took this, so this plus this is easy to sort of like line those numbers up. But if I took this and then did something up like, oh, I just want to add on 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, right? It's hard to sort of like add those up in your head, because at some point, like this is the 4th number across and this is the 3rd, right? And you get to the end and yeah, it's not great. So monospacing helps with that and set that up. Again, this is all based on if the font supports it in there. All right, then we've also got positioning. So we've got like things if you're doing like scientific notation for anything, you can do subscript and superscript. You can also use it for other things like registered trademarks and stuff like that for that as well. But this is specifically for numbers, but you can also do that for the for superscript and subscript of those things. Then we've also got fractions. So if you type in 1/2 like that, you can then it'll actually transform it into a specific character that is 1/2, which is really, really nice. And it works for pretty much every number combination that you can think of for that. Then you have a /0, or a non/0. So this just helps with legibility and not confusing numbers with letters and stuff like that. So if you have not that it's like specifically for like learning disabilities, but it just helps. It helps with people that have that affliction, and we can like make it easier and more accessible for them. And you'll sort of see that with a few other like things here, where you sort of like have contextual alternatives for arrows and all kinds of stuff. As I mentioned, this is all based on like what the font provides. So for example, they have a stylistic set for certain numbers to help you recognize a 1 versus a lowercase l, for example, a 3 versus like a capital B next to a lowercase l. So like if you had a 1 and a 3 right next to each other, and then you had an uppercase B, depending on the letter spacing, that can be confused with something else. So yeah, dyslexia, like learning abilities, like those kinds of things can be really helpful for people that need that. Same thing for the number 4, that can be often confused for like the capital letter A, because usually a lot of 4s actually join at this point, right? So as you can sort of see, it joins at that point. Where did it go? There it is. So it joins at that number 4 there. So it can be confused as a capital A. 6 and 9, again, because the 6 is like that and the 9 is like that, it's easy to tell which is a 6 and which is a 9, especially at smaller font sizes. Then we also have 1, 3, and 4, and 6 and 9 again. It's just showing those off. But like I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of different things, and you can turn these on individually or turn them on as a set. which is really cool. And you can go through that. So yeah, so that's what all the type details do. And as I mentioned, different for every single font that you choose. All right, what else do we have to go through? We have to go through styles and then fill, stroke, and effects. Okay, so let's do just that. So very similar to what we were doing with our colors last week, we're going to go through how we might use styles to help us out. So in this case, we have a paragraph style, right? So 18, and so I'm going to change this to maybe 16 and 24 for our line height. And maybe this is our font size for this. What I am going to do as well is I'm going to just blow this away and reset it back to like lowercase and then back to as typed. So I'm just going to undo that until we get back to the original intent of the success. And actually, I'll just use this text. Let's just throw these away. I'm doing a million times. Let's just use this one here. All right. So if I use this here, what we can then sort of start to do is set this to our 16 and 24 for our spacing and line height. Sorry, our size and our line height, and reset this back to 0. We can use our paragraph spacing if we want, but in this case, I'm going to just set this to 0 as well. And what we can start to do is we can actually like create a text file, like a text style associated to it. So what this does is very much like the color styles. It allows us to like link a whole bunch of different types of text throughout your document and make sure that if you change one, it changes all of them at the same time. So everything that is linked, that is. So what this helps us do is keep our document nice and clean. And again, our developers won't hate us for creating a million different text styles. So we can keep it under wraps. So let's do just that. If we were to create, as you can sort of see, I've already created one. So I'm just going to delete this one by clicking out of everything. So I haven't got any items selected. And I can just simply right click on this and say delete style. So I'm going to do that. So very similar to what we did again with the color styles, we're going to give it a naming convention to it. So if we create this as a style, this is going to be paragraph text. So let's type in paragraph. But we also know that there's going to be different types of paragraph styles. There's going to be a default one, there's going to be a large one, and there's also going to be a small one. So a large one might be used for like marketing copy. It also might be used for like pull quotes or something like that. And then a small one might be used for like terms and conditions at the bottom of the page or something like that. So this one we're going to have a default. So I'm going to say /default and then create that style. So what you'll notice here is that like nothing's changed because nothing has. But as I want to type something else into something else, it will actually like use that by default because that was the last one that I had selected. But you can also change, very similar to the color styles. You can, if you change one, you change all of them. So if I change this to 160, obviously it looks deranged, but it works, right? You change one, and it changes all of them. All right, so let's just change that back to a normal number. There we go. And use that. So you'll notice as well the properties here aren't every single property that we were just manipulating, right? You'll notice that it doesn't actually take into consideration a text alignment or the alignment of the top or middle or bottom there. What it does do is it does do all the things that we were just mentioning in terms of font size, letter spacing, line height, paragraph spacing, and all of the type details that we're going through for the open type stuff. So it does take into consideration like that, but it does not take into consideration the alignment as well as any of the other fill, stroke, or effects that are associated to it. So what you'll notice here is that if I do actually set up a color that is black, for example, and I create this as a color style. So neutral /black, and then create that as a style. And then I might have an orange or something like that, like a really burnt orange. Let's go more orange. I might have like a really burnt orange that I use throughout this. And then I call this, I create a style for this that is orange/orange -9 for that. And then here, create style. So what I can do is if I link this to a, like the black there, nothing changes again because it's already black. But if I now duplicate this, I can still have the same paragraph style, but have it associated to a different color. So if I change this to orange, like it still is the same thing here. So you'll notice that it says paragraph default and neutral black, and then paragraph default and orange 9. And what this allows me to do is still edit this to be, I don't know, 24 and 32, right? And still have that so that it changes both at the same time while still keeping the color there. So that's something to note, is that styles, text styles are not linked to color styles. The reason why I'm harping on this is because they are in Sketch. And not only that, the alignment is also in Sketch. So every single property is in Sketch, whereas Figma is different. So just be careful of that. So for this, yeah, so you got fixed size, you got styles, and you're combining it with the color styles. And of course, you can also do that with stroke and effects as well, right? It's not just the color there. So you can give text a stroke. I don't advise doing that, but you can if you're going for a specific look. You can also do the same thing with a drop shadow. I do advise on this when you're trying to increase the contrast with maybe like a background image or something like that, and you want to like do that effect. Or if you're doing something where you're mocking up a screen that has like subtitles, for example, like that might be helpful. And I guess the stroke would be helpful for that as well, depending on the way that you use the stroke. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for the typography portion of it. There are a few things in terms of like plugins that I'll quickly go through, because I often get that question. It's like, what plugins are you using for your typography? And I've already shown off one of them, which is the proper title case, which is really, really helpful for when you actually do want title case to work well. And the other one is the other two that I use to like get started is Styler, which I actually went through last time, but I'll go through it again, and then Font Scale. So both of these are like really cool little plugins. They are very specific to what they do. But let's say that we had a font scale. So in my tokens here, if I zoom out just a little bit, I have a font scale from 44 pixels. So 44 pixels for the font size and 56 pixels for the line height. That's what those two numbers mean. This is the size that I'm associating them to. And then this is the actual function that they serve, the purpose that they serve. So the semantic name, essentially. Yeah, so in this case, I have a 32 and 44 for an H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, so on. And then I also have all of my my buttons, my text fields, all that kind of stuff is all inside of there. And as you'll notice that there'll be some things that are 16 by 24, but that are bold in some cases, and that becomes a heading 5, and then like another bold for the button, or regular for the text field input, and so on. So yeah, there's all these like different uses for all of these. But let's say that I have that I want to create a scale like this from 10 to 44. So how would you create that? Well, mine is actually manually picked, but there are ways to at least like get you started. So let's just type in like something here, and let's actually create a font scale based on this. So if we click on font scale, what it'll do is it'll actually create, like it will say like, oh, what is your base size? So if our base size is like 14 or whatever, we can use that. And then we can then scale it up based on that. So font scale is just one of the many plugins that does this. There's actually quite a few in the community. So if you go into community and type in font, there's actually quite a few fonts inside of here, like font related, like plugins. So there's a lot of things to do with Font Awesome, like which is an icon scent. And then there's also some things that allow you to do some pretty cool things. But there are a lot of things based on the scale, which if I can find here. So you've got this type scales one here and a few others. So it really sort of like depends on what you need out of it. But this one here actually like allows you to choose how many smaller than the base and how many larger than the base that you want to go. So if you click on install there and then go back to the line height exercise and then click on the, oh, what was the name of it? I messed that up. And that is type scales. There we go. So go back to this one and ST. Okay, it's not in there just yet. Okay, let me maybe I need to quit out of this. So yep. So let me quit out of Figma and then just relaunch that, because I think something did not really work too well. And go back into that one and wait for the plugins to load up. Did I install it? I did install it, right? I'm not taking any crazy pills. Okay. Type scales. Oh, I didn't install it. Okay, there we go. That would be why I can't see it in my plugins list. Okay, so let's go to the plugins, go to type scales, and click there. So in this, you can set it up to 16 pixels for your base, for example, and then you can also change what the preview text is going to be, and you can use a different scale based on this. And there are no like exact like rules like, oh, you have to choose a minor second or a major third or whatever else. Like it's up to you. But what I tend to do is I find that like whatever one you use, you may like do some tweaking afterwards anyway. So that's actually what I've done. Is mine was pretty close to a minor and a major third. It's like somewhere in between those two, and it sort of like fluctuates. But what I've found is that like over time, I've found like my groove as to like what font sizes that I like to use for my scale, and I just like copy and paste them across my documents essentially. But if you're starting out and you don't know what the heck you're doing, this is a great place to start. Yeah, you can create your own thing there. And as you can sort of see, you can set it up so that you can just do two numbers up and two numbers down. So you start off with 16, but then it does two numbers above that and two numbers below that, and it gives you that scale going from there. And as you can sort of see, it's a 1.25 scale based on that. So yeah, you can also choose to round the values or not to round the values, depending on what you want to do. But what that does is when I generate this, it will actually generate a nice little scale for me in here. And it doesn't actually name them or do any generation of the styles or anything like that. It just simply like creates those there. So if I want to then tweak them for whatever reason, maybe I want to adjust the line height, or maybe I want to make micro adjustments in terms of the font size, I can do that and create that. So once I've made up my scale here, then what I would use is this nice styler, like a plugin as well. And what this will do is this will generate styles based off of the name. So right now the name is not that great. So if this is like our heading, for example, so if I say heading / H5, and then this is our heading / H6, and so on, I can select both of those, and then I can click on this little the little styler plugin and then say generate styles, and that will, over on the right hand side, if I don't click into anything, it then creates the heading H5 and heading H6, because it's basing it off of the text, the name of the text layer there. All right. So then I sort of went into proper title case as well. But yeah, generating a font scale, generating those automatically is really, really helpful. And of course, you can manipulate that. One last thing before we get into questions is I often get asked, like, my text styles and color styles are all messed up, right? They're all in like a weird order. How do I like fix that? And the best thing to do there is actually, so for example, like if you click into this one here, this has a heck of a lot more like font styles and color styles. So you can see if this was in disarray, this would be like alarming, right? It'd be very hard to figure out what's going on. But the cool thing about this is if you don't have anything selected, so like I said, just click on the absolute background of everything. You can actually move this. So maybe you wanted the larger things to be first. So for example, paragraph large, I want it to be up, and then paragraph medium, I want it to be in the middle. I just clicked that over too many times. So I have large, medium, and small, right? So when I go to press a piece of, like type in a bit of text there and change it to my paragraph, you can then see that it's now large, medium, and small rather than small, medium, large, and go from there. So yeah, just play around with that if you're wanting to do that. The default is that it will go based off of the folder names and do that alphabetically. But then as soon as you do like any kind of manipulation in this kind of way, it will remove that. It will go, oh, okay, you don't really want your display or your heading or whatever else in that order anymore. So for example, if I wanted to select this and move display underneath there, and then change that again to whatever I wanted to there, you'll see that heading is now above display. But before, the default was display comes above the heading because D comes before H in the alphabet. So that's something, just a quick little note there as to how to clean up your styles once you've started to generate all of them, and you're wanting to just go that extra mile of setting all of that sort of stuff up. All right, let's move on to questions, and I'll let Diego handle it from there.
Sweet. Thank you for that. All right, we'll get to questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for posting all of your questions. So I am so sorry if I mispronounce your name. Just saying that ahead of time. So Kieran is asking, can we preview the font this way? And this was asked in the beginning of the webinar.
Yeah, so unfortunately there isn't any sort of preview inside of Figma, which is a little bit silly. But I think there are plugins for that. I haven't like, for me, like I don't really like to preview inside of Figma anyway. But I use like Fontbook, for example, which is like the default thing that is like installed on your Mac. There are similar programs out there for Windows, but this is where I would come in here and then go to things that are like the user, for example. So as you can sort of see here, I was actually trying to like type in like quotes before, and sort of like see what the best quotes were to use for a very specific use, right? So I ended up using criteria as ones because I wanted quotes that look like quotes, like the 66 and the 99 sort of like way of doing it. So yeah, unfortunately there isn't one inside of there, but I think I heard of a plugin that does that. So you might want to just do some searching on the plugin front.
Sweet. Lana is asking, so line height is the same as leading?
Yeah, so your leading is, yeah, they're pretty much the same thing for that. So yeah, if you're coming from a print world or graphic design world, you're used to like leading and doing all of that. But yeah, line height is the same thing there.
Brianna is asking, is there a template we can follow or use after this call?
Yeah, not necessarily, like, because I didn't go through any specific things in terms of like a document that you can take home and play around with any sort of examples. But if there's something specific that you'd like to go through and like to get examples of, feel free to reach out on Slack and yeah, let me know what you want to do there.
Abigail is asking, what's a good rule of thumb for spacing between headers, subheaders, and body text?
Yeah, again, this is very dependent on the actual font itself and what you're choosing for the header, because sometimes you might have a different font for your header than you do for your actual text there. Usually I start off with something around like 12 or 16 pixels between that, but it also depends on the rest of your design as well, right? If you're making like an art gallery kind of website, you're going to have a lot of like extra spacing around because you want the typography to be like almost all consuming, because it sort of like works well with the really big imagery. Whereas if you're doing like a banking app or something like that, that's quite reserved, you're going to be like really tight with your spacing and everything else. So it is highly dependent on the project. It's highly dependent on the fonts that you choose, but use those Gestalt principles in terms of when things look like they are close to each other, they look like they belong with each other, right? So it's sort of like a parent-child relationship. So the siblings of a paragraph with a paragraph should be pretty similar, but then the parent-child relationship might be a little bit different from the sibling relationship of two paragraphs. So I would sort of like think about like in what context you're using this and what is the rest of the design looking like before answering that question. But roughly, like if I was to sort of like put an exact number on it, it's anywhere between like 8 pixels and 16 pixels is usually where I sort of like fluctuate for that.
Lana's asking, most of my fonts are desktop. Do I need to buy a font for web and app? That gets expensive, she mentions.
Yeah, it does. So the only time that you would need it, and this is something that a lot of people ask as well, is that with your web fonts, the only time that you need to like use it as a web font is when you're actually like creating a website for it, right? So like when you get a WOF or a WOF2, so web open file format or something like that, I think it's I don't know, I can't remember what the O stands for, so I might be getting that wrong. So WOF and WOF2, WOF2 is obviously better. It's the second version of WOF, and it does a better better use of compression. So when you're downloading all of your fonts, it doesn't take as long. So yeah, if you're using a WOF font, yeah, you're really only using that on browsers, right? So you're not really having to worry about like, if you're in that stage of you're still debating which fonts you're going to be using, it wouldn't be wise to spend all your money on all the fonts, right? There are like things like Adobe Typekit and other things like that will help you keep those costs down, and like by essentially like using demo fonts and stuff like that. And yeah, there are some shady ways of using fonts, which I won't go on here about, but there are some ways of doing that as well. But it's it's only like what is the end result for your project. If it's an app or if it's a website, like you've got to think about like what license you're going to be using. So yeah, for the time being, if you haven't created a website yet, like you don't need to buy the web font for it. The other thing there is that it is a tax write-off. So either you eat the cost or the company that you're writing that you're designing for eats the cost. So if you're doing a freelance thing, you can decide to invoice yourself, like as a company, or you can decide to invoice the client. It's up to you. The reason why I would actually invoice the client is because you do have to have a different license per client, because every single client has different audiences, and different licenses apply for different audiences and different uses of that font. So to say it does get expensive, yeah, it does. But a lot of that is passed on to the client, or is a tax write-off for yourself. So you do have to put the money up front, but you do get it off at the end.
Okay. Fatima is asking, when working on the logo, how can we determine a font size corresponding to a certain percentage on Figma? Let's say I want to see my design logo at 50%. Is there a way to achieve that on Figma?
I'm not quite sure I get the question. The main thing there is, like, if you're using like an actual editable piece of text as your logo, you're probably doing something wrong there. It should be flattened at that point if you're using a logo, to then be able to scale it. Yeah, so if for example my logo is Kieran, right, and I have like a little like avatar or something like that, I'm not going to be like using this everywhere and then like resizing that to sort of like fit or whatever wherever I'm using it. I'm going to be like creating outlines for this. So to create outlines, you can either right click and say outline stroke, which doesn't really make sense. They really should like rename that because it should be convert to outlines, because then it would work for strokes and text. But they've left it as outline stroke, so whatever. Outline stroke or Command Shift O, and what that'll do is that'll actually make it into like actual like usable text. Usable vector points for this. So then you can grab that, and then you can scale that based on whatever you need, right? So I wouldn't be. You can technically do this at this point if you use the scale tool and grab that and do that. But it's not good, as you can sort of see that it's bouncing around because it's trying to fit on the text on the pixel alignment there. So it's just bouncing around a whole lot. So it's not pixel accurate at that point. I would just outline your text, and your life will be a whole lot easier.
Anne is asking, what are the guidelines to how many different types of typography per design, as well as the amount of variance in sizing?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the amount of fonts, so let's say, so the amount of fonts is important for a few different reasons. So the amount of fonts is, one is recognizability, right? You don't want to have your website start to look like a ransom letter, right? You want it to actually look like this page corresponds with the next page, corresponds with the next page, and so on. So that's one, is consistency. Number two is actually accessibility in terms of your internet connection, because every font that you use, so not just font, but font weight that you use, has a size associated to it. So when you go to a website and they have 1,000 fonts being loaded, that's 1,000 fonts that have to be loaded to the page before you can access the page, right? Or that it does like a weird jump in your text and it does like something crazy. So for me, what I'd be looking at is, first, consistency. Second, speed, right? Those are the two metrics that I would base that off. For the and aesthetics comes in there somewhere as well, I'm sure. But the other thing for as for the how many scale steps you would have, that is highly dependent on what you need from your scale system, right? In what you sort of saw just before, I have 9, right? And that's because that's all I needed, right? There is no sort of like, oh, you can only have 9 and that's it, right? Or you can only have 3 and that's it. Or you can only have 72 and that's it. Like, there is no like upper limit or lower limit there. It's purely what you come up with as a designer and as a developer, what you can come to an agreement with. The reason why I keep bringing up the developer aspect of this is because they're going to eventually have to create this. And they're going to look at you weird if you have 72 different font sizes. They're going to be like, why? Why do we need that many? And you're going to have to explain to them like why you need that many. So I've gotten away with 9, right? And they just seem to they just have different semantic uses like throughout, and that does well for me in there, and that creates enough of a scale to be used across a whole bunch of different things. So yeah.
How are you determining the value to multiply, referring to 1.2 or 1.5, etc.?
Yeah, so that's talking about the line height. So that is that's going back to this question up here, right? So so how do I know which one to multiply by? Well, like I don't, right? It's just trial and error. Like, that's why I sort of said it's a rule of thumb, right? So at the smaller end of the scale, I want to multiply by 1.5. At the middle, at the end of the scale, I want to do 1.2. And then any number in between, I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I'm going to try out a few different things and then make sure that that it is between 1.2 and 1.5. That's the only like known factor that I have, is that it's going to be bigger than this number. It's going to be smaller than that number. That's the only known that I do have. So it is, like I said, a rule of thumb, trial and error, and that's the way that I would handle it. If you try to make sense of it like too much, because it is more about optics than it is about like exact values, right? It's about how you perceive the text, like, because nobody's going to go, oh, that's 1.47. What are you doing there, right? Like nobody's going to do that, right? But they are going to go, that looks like crap, and they're going to like call you out on that. So that's what I'd be more worried about rather than exact values for that kind of thing. So yeah, as to which one do I know, like how do I know which one to use? I simply don't. It's just trial and error, but I do know, but it's between 1.2 and 1.5.
Awesome. Sean is asking, are the tutorial files accessible?
Again, like I didn't really like, the only thing that I really did was like this little thing here as like a part of the tutorial. I mean, feel free to take a screenshot of that, but I mean, it's nothing groundbreaking there. But yeah, I'll leave it on the screen for a little bit longer if you guys need to, yeah, take a screenshot of it, and we can go from there. But again, if you want anything really super specific, let me know. And as you can sort of see, this is rough as guts. Like I didn't really do anything. I just like quickly drew like a quick bell curve. It's not based on the actual data. It's just, yeah, that's just like a quick sort of like sketch to sort of say, this is roughly where I get most of my fonts, like my font sizes.
Sweet, which I think this would probably as a follow-up. Is there a way to preview the fonts like you had at the beginning of the presentation?
Yeah, again, I'll leave it up on the screen for a second. So if anybody wants to take a screenshot, I'll just zoom in on that, just to make sure that we have all the numbers visible. And then there you go. I'll also just take a screenshot because it might the stream might be a little bit like garbled, yeah, or whatever. Yes. So let me just do Command-Shift-4 and just save it to my desktop there, and then I'll put it in the chat as well, so we can add. You have to do it through. Okay, that's not fun. Okay, let me.
You can.
That's really not fun. Drive.google. What were you going to say, Diego? Sorry.
I was going to say maybe you could. No, but yeah, we can't. I was going to say we can't even upload it. I was going to say if you could Slack it to me, but we can't upload unless.
Yeah, it won't let you like upload it. So what I'll actually do is a lot of you will have access to the Slack. So what I'll do is I'll put it into the events page in Slack. If you go into that and events, and we'll put that in there, and go to the desktop there and put that in there. So if for whatever reason it was a bit gobbled on the stream, you can do it there. Do we have an events channel there? I'm sure we do. Browse channels.
We do.
Oh, there it is. Yep. Cool. Join channel. There we go. And then I'll chuck it in there as well. And put that there and send it there. So if you're in the UX Academy Foundations or just the plain old UX Academy, it's in both of those Slack channels there for you.
Sweet. Thank you. Brianna's asking, for headers and subheadings, what is your opinion on using proper title case versus all uppercase or all lowercase? How do you know when it is best to use proper title case?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me, I like to use title case as much as possible because I find that it's easier to read. It's easier on the eye to read. Something like a heading, like I generally don't, like the only time that I would do a heading in all caps is like when it's more of like a subline to that. So for example, if I was to make like, let's just get rid of that. That's terrible. The Comic Sans was coming back from the dead. So let's go and just use just a basic paragraph here. So let's go medium, and then let's just put this piece of text here, align it to the left there, and then use like a heading 2 or something like this, and then say that this is a cool heading, right? And then what I would then do is if I was to then use, not that one, if I was to then use the H6 for this, right? And then sort of say like about me or something like that. For that, like I'd probably use like a different color. Like I might use like a red or something like that, or like one of the accent colors that like from my designs or whatever the case may be. But yeah, like I wouldn't like use like all uppercase for something like this because it just becomes a little bit harder to read overall. So yeah, it's more about like what the usage is and going from there. So yeah, that's the way that I'd sort of like go about doing something like that. Typically, I don't really use like all uppercase for my headings unless it's like a super line like that or a subline.
Suzanne is asking, when you're changing the line height with like 1, 3 or so, but you're working with an 8-pixel grid for vertical rhythm, how do you manage to fit the font scale into the grid, or does that have nothing to do with it?
Yeah, and this is sort of like getting into more intermediate to advanced like level stuff. I particularly like to use, you may or may not have seen that, is that like all of my font sizes are actually like even numbers, right? They're not all on the 4-pixel amount, but they're all even numbers. But the line height themselves are all on the 4-pixel grid there. So you do have that vertical rhythm throughout. The reason why I do that is for something like a button, for example. So we have like a button here. For the people who don't know like what vertical rhythm is or what the heck I'm talking about when I talk about like 4-pixel grid and all that kind of stuff, the reason why like we would like pay attention to something like this is for something like a button, which is like, in this case, I have it set to 16 pixels for the font size and 24 for the line height. So if I copy that, and if I was to just quickly create a button over here and paste that button text over here, create a little button behind change this to like, I don't know, our purple, let's say. Let's do this purple here. And then let's just change this to our white, right? And then we have maybe a 4 pixel rounded or something like that. So what we can then do is this is 24 pixels high, right? And then what we would want to then do is also have our spacing variables, which are all like being used for like on that 4 pixel grid. So 4, 8, 12, so on and so forth. So if I were to then choose what spacing I have for the padding of this, so I might select 12 above and below. So if I set that up using auto layout, I can set that to 12 there. And then I set this to, I don't know, 24, somewhere around there. What that allows me to do is, because the padding above and below is a multiple of 4, and then the line height is a multiple of 4, the overall component is a multiple of 4, right? And this is what the question asker was just sort of saying there, is like, what, like, are you paying attention to that? Do you care about that? So on and so forth. So yes, if you are paying attention to that, if you are caring about that, like you would sit there and do that. But yeah, it's a very manual process after the fact of like maybe generating a font scale. You have to then go back and then make sure that all of your line heights are multiples of 4 and look good at multiples of 4. So then you might have to do some tweaking to make that look good overall. So yeah, so that's how I would approach it. Is yes, I do actually like care about the vertical rhythm and stuff like that. So that's why personally I don't use percentages for my line height. Some people don't care about it. I particularly do. So yeah, it's more of a personal preference than anything else.
Thank you. Ellen is asking, would you make a paragraph style for larger screens and another for smaller, i.e. mobile, if you're designing responsive?
Yeah, so that's probably like the biggest missing feature for Figma is understanding breakpoints, right? So depending on a breakpoint, so as you were saying there, the different like desktop sizes or different, in this case, we could use it based off of a frame size. So based off of a frame size, like how big should this text be, right? So on a TV, right, you're like quite a like you're at least 6 feet or 2 meters away from the TV. At least I hope you are. And then then something like on your watch, something on your phone is a lot closer to your face, right? So otherwise you're doing these ones, you're like holding out your phone like that. You're just not doing that. So, and then same with your desktop. Like if you're sitting ergonomically sound, you can put your arm straight out like this, and you should only be like tippy tapping on the screen, right? So in both of those cases, like in all of those cases, you may use different font sizes for that. What I've found over the years is that like the font sizes that I've chosen actually work for like for all the things that I would use. There are situations that yes, it does require me to do different breakpoints for that, but it really comes down to then like documenting that in Figma. And staying on top of making sure that you are addressing that both in the desktop and the tablet and the mobile view, if you're doing those 3 as breakpoints, or if you're doing it on the watch, what size is it? If you're doing it on the TV, what size is it? And so on and so forth. So you can definitely do that. Some people address this issue by creating a style, like a team library that is specific for mobile, and a team library that is specific for desktop and stuff like that. So they have 2 separate libraries altogether, so that if you're making the web version of it, you're making the web version for mobile, making the iOS version, you're making the Android version. Those are all like targeting the mobile device, and they sort of like have a team library based on that. So all of your font sizes are all the same for the device, not so much the same for the platform that they're on. So it depends on what you're trying to do there. If you're wanting to do a similar thing, that might be a good approach for you. Some people simply would create another version of this where they have heading dash desktop slash h1, right? And then they'll duplicate all of those things again. So so let's go to how I've seen it done by other people. So they may actually do this and just duplicate that whole thing, and then rename all of these to dash mobile in front of that, and then heading dash mobile, and so on, right? So whatever the device is, and then they make their micro adjustments throughout, and then they save that as a new text style to then be used. The hard part about this is keeping it all straight, right? Because there isn't, unfortunately, a way to say, based on the frame size, based on the super frame size, then choose this, which is what you would do in web, right? So based on the device width, or based on the vertical height, or based on the viewport height, or the viewport width, do this, right? That's how you usually set up breakpoints. But there is no concept of that, at least yet, in Figma. So it's a lot harder to keep your head straight with all of that. But it is possible through textiles.
Okay, next question. Would it be okay to use a Type Foundry font that we really like and just make sure the secondary font in HTML is a Google font? I really love the look of a typeface from a Type Foundry that I want to use in my portfolio, but I was told that was a bad idea.
I would ask why it was a bad idea. So it might just look bad. Aesthetically, it might just look bad. And so whenever you get that kind of feedback, always seek clarification. I wouldn't take that at face value. Just remove it, right? I would seek to wonder why they would say no to that. Of course, hopefully you are paying for that. That might be one of the reasons why they said no, don't do that, because you might have stolen that font. But all things considered, if you paid for it, the only thing that I can sort of see there is a Type Foundry font might be hosted by the Type Foundry, or it might be hosted by Google, right? So if we go back to those three things that I was mentioning, is that the speed, right, of downloading the font, the aesthetics, and then the consistency, or throughout. So if the consistency looks good, right, so consistency and aesthetics are there, right? So you're only using two fonts. You're using the heading font, and then you're using the body font. So consistency is not that big of an issue. Then it's aesthetics is one of the issues that could be. So it could just look crappy. So just figure that one out. Then the other one is speed, right? Whoever gave you that feedback may be worried about the fact that it has to go to a Font Foundry website to get your fonts. It has to go to a Google font website to get the fonts from there. And then it also has to go to your website to then download the rest of your content, right? If you, to narrow down that scope, what I would be then doing is to think about speed and all that kind of stuff, is that I would be making sure that if you're using something like Webflow, for example, for your website, that allows you to either use Google Fonts API to go to their website and use their their content delivery network, or their CDN. So essentially their link to their font, right? Or you can download the font as a WAF and a WAF2, and then upload that to Webflow or whatever web service you're using, and have all of that in the same place, usually within the same folder. So Webflow, there is no concept of folders. You just you just import it into there. But if you're using something like WordPress or something else like that, then I'd be uploading it into the same folder. So then that way, when someone is visiting your website, they don't have to look at 3 different parts of the internet just to use your website. So I would seek clarification on that. So it could be a consistency issue, but I don't think it is. It might be an aesthetic issue, which it most likely probably is. It probably looks terrible. And then the third one might be speed. So I would seek clarification on those 3, and then say, yeah, why do you hate this combination, or why do you see fit that is the wrong thing to do?
Brianna's also asking, and it's more of confirming in a way, SVGs are the best for logos on the web, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because SVGs are scalable, as the name suggests. Scalable vector graphic is what that is short for. So what that means is that, yes, it is best for a lot of purposes. There are some instances where SVGs are not so great. So things like effects, like drop shadows and gradients and stuff like that, they're probably not the best. So that's where a PNG would do better. And what I would be using is a Retina PNG. So if you do an @2x or an @3x PNG for that, that also works well. Yeah, JPEGs not so much. PNGs, yes, and SVGs, yes, but every file format has their downfall somewhere. There's no perfect solution for every single situation.
Great. Lana now is asking, is it better to create icons and logos in Figma versus Illustrator? Is there a technical advantage?
No. No, there is no technical advantage. Illustrator is very good at what it does, which is an illustration tool. Figma is not so much an illustration tool. Figma is much more a UI tool. So yes, you can do a lot of icons in Figma, and it is very possible. And a lot of people do that, like senior designers like myself, and people who've been doing it for a very long time do it in Figma all the time. So that isn't an issue. What is more appropriate, I guess, is in Illustrator, there are a lot more tools that do very, very specific things to help you make a better icon. So things like rotating around a point and stuff like that. There's things like doing things like setting things to wave and sharpen and do jagged edges and all that kind of stuff. There's just so much more inside of Illustrator that helps you make a better icon set overall. But yeah, there's no technical advantage. They both export to SVG, just like anything else. They both have, if you're wanting to export them into a font, into an icon font, they both have plugins to do that. So again, no technical advantage there. They both can export to PNGs if you want to export your icons to PNGs for whatever reason. So yeah, no real technical advantage other than what you can do with the tool inside of it. So yeah.
Our last question, Kristen is asking, what was the nice, simple, and basic geometric font Kieran selected to work and pointed it out at one point in the presentation? I think it sounded something like ILK. I just want to know that name.
Yeah, so it's Inter, INTER. So that's what I'm using right now. So that's it there, INTER.
Great.
So that's available. That's available on Google Fonts as well. So if you go to the Google Fonts website, Inter is also there, so you can just download that version there.
Fabulous. That was actually our last question for today, Kieran.
Perfect.
So some of you were asking if this will be available later. Yes, it will be uploaded to our YouTube page, which should be linked already in the chat. and to someone else who asked it in the questions tab. So you'll be able to find that recording in our YouTube page, most likely by the end of the day tomorrow. Thank you, Kieran. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Please stay tuned for our next webinar. And I hope that everyone continues to stay safe, to stay healthy. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Kieran, for always doing this.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.